I require a husband, and you, a strong daughter." The formidable widow announced, her voice like a tempest in sturdy boots, to a struggling cowboy standing amidst his half-demolished barn. Eli Harper, mid-lift, dropped his shovel. Straw billowed, his breath hitched. Years had passed since anyone had addressed him with such directness, let alone anything remotely approaching it. Maeve Callahan offered no pause for his response. She advanced, her stature commanding. Her coat, billowing in the wind like a banner, was caked with mud up to her calves, her hair a wild tangle, her face set in a mask of unyielding resolve. "You are destitute, defeated, and profoundly alone," she stated, her gaze locked unswervingly upon his. "I, however, possess acreage, fuel for the hearth, and a solitude that most men would readily trade their souls for." She withdrew a folded document from her coat. A marriage covenant, she declared, no sentimental adornments, no marital band, no feigned endearments or deceitful whispers. Merely labor, sustenance, shelter, and perhaps, in time, a daughter whose resilience will outlast us both. The sole audible sound was the wind whistling through a breach in the barn's structure. Eli remained motionless, his blistered, trembling hands still clenched around the aged, splintered haft of a tool predating him. He appeared as a man presented with either a divine intervention or a dire curse. Maeve deposited the paper onto a stack of hay. "The sun will set in 4 hours. That is your allotted time." With that, she turned and departed, leaving behind a trail of muddy boot prints and a man stripped of all he held dear. Merely 2 months prior, Eli Harper was herding cattle, his spirit brimming with optimism, his future still taking discernible shape. Yet hope has a cruel tendency to fade slowly. His horse succumbed, his brother vanished, and his ranch was illicitly seized by a financier with ink-stained fingers and an unctuous smile. Maeve Callahan was fully cognizant of every detail. Despite this, she selected him, not for affection or charm, but because he represented the final bastion of integrity in Dust Hollow. She had no inclination for men who masked their deceit with smiles. At sundown, he walked onto her property, the contract bearing his signature in hand, his father's dagger secured to his thigh, not out of anticipation of peril, but because Maeve Callahan, by her very presence, compelled one to remain vigilant. She stood awaiting him on the porch, her arms crossed, a formidable barricade of firewood stacked behind her. The house itself, constructed of stone and sinew, was more imposing than he had envisioned, much like the woman herself. "I have affixed my signature," Eli announced, extending the document. Maeve did not retrieve it. She simply surveyed him, her eyes tracing his journey from his worn boots to the weary slump of his shoulders, burdened by a life fraught with misfortune. "Do you still harbor the desire to perish?" she inquired directly. He blinked. "For I will not enter into matrimony with a man teetering on the precipice of oblivion," she elaborated. "I require an individual who will persevere, one capable of offering comfort when she weeps at midnight, questioning the disparity in her hands compared to those of other young ladies." Eli swallowed with difficulty. "I am not departing," he affirmed. Maeve offered a single nod. That was sufficient. They exchanged vows 2 days hence, a tarnished horseshoe affixed to the post of the makeshift altar. A clergyman indebted to Maeve for 3 past courtesies provided their marital blessing, accompanied by naught but the wind's serenade. Maeve eschewed traditional bridal attire, opting for black boots and a broad leather belt, as if prepared for combat. Eli wore nothing new, merely cleaned his existing garments and smoothed his hair with his fingers. When the officiant posed the question, "Do you take this man?" Maeve interjected with a decisive, "I do. Let us proceed." The townsfolk were bewildered, murmuring and pointing. "She could have wed anyone. She has clearly lost her senses. He is but half a man." Maeve remained indifferent, as she always had. On their inaugural night, Eli slept on the floor, not by her directive, but because the bed felt excessively vast, immaculately clean, and imbued with a sense of permanence. Maeve placed a blanket beside him without a word. She expected no tenderness, she anticipated diligence. And diligence was what they delivered. From dawn till dusk, they meticulously constructed a life, akin to erecting a fence post, one excavation, one nail, one blister at a time. He meticulously repaired the north gate. She felled timber with a speed that outpaced his ability to stack it. He demonstrated the intricacies of mending a wagon wheel. She, in turn, exhibited the swiftness of dressing a deer faster than its lifeblood could ebb. Their physical contact remained non-existent. However, in the nocturnal hours, when the wind buffeted the window panes and the coyotes cried like abandoned infants lost in the gloom, they found solace in the shared rhythm of each other's breathing through the intervening wall, and somehow that sufficed. One morning, she presented him with a steaming chalice and a bowl of stew so dense it could support an upright spoon. "Why do you desire a daughter?" he inquired. Maeve settled beside him on the porch. The frigid air stung their countenances, yet neither flinched. "Because the world is unforgiving towards young women like I once was," she stated. "Tall, vociferous, intelligent, unwedded. It either devours them or instills in them the necessity of self-effacement." Eli gazed across the field, where frost lay like shards of glass upon the verdant blades. "You wish to teach her to resist diminishing herself? I wish to teach her to assert herself." They lapsed into silence for an hour, yet within that quietude a subtle transformation occurred. Not affection, not yet, but the nascent beginnings of something more. That evening, as Eli was engaged in chopping firewood in the encroaching darkness, headlights pierced the arboreal canopy. A vehicle, loud, out of place. Maeve emerged, a rifle slung across her shoulder, and an unnerving composure that chilled one's very marrow. Jared Holt, her deceased husband's cousin. Wealthy, malicious, vindictive. He disembarked slowly, a serpentine grin stretching across his face, impeccably attired. "You presume that the mere act of signing a document bestows ownership of this land upon you, Maeve?" he taunted, his gaze flicking towards Eli. "Or are you once again indulging in a game of make-believe?" Maeve's expression remained impassive. "You have 10 seconds to depart, or face the consequences." Jared chortled. Eli did not hesitate. He advanced, shovel still in hand, positioning himself between Jared and the porch. No raised voices, no overt threats, merely the profound stillness of a man who had resolved that defeat was no longer an option. Jared appraised him, as if assessing the weight of livestock. "Do you imagine you intimidate me?" "No," Elias replied calmly. "I believe I am the reason you continue to draw breath." A flicker of something vital extinguished in Jared's smile. After a pause that stretched for an uncomfortable duration, he re-entered his truck and drove away. Maeve approached Eli's side. "You meant that?" she inquired. "I do not repeat myself," he responded. She regarded him intently, then offered a single confirming nod. That night, she did not proffer a blanket. Instead, she opened the door to her chamber, and for the first time since their encounter, Eli Callahan did not recline on the floor. The morning following their shared slumber, Maeve made no reference to the event. She awoke before him, kindled the hearth, prepared kindling, retrieved eggs from the coop, and as he finally stumbled into the kitchen, partially dressed and adrift in his own being, she slid a plate of cornbread towards him, remarking, "Eat." It was as if nothing had transpired, yet everything had irrevocably changed. He sat opposite her, their knees nearly brushing beneath the modest table. Wisps of steam ascended between them, but not from the sustenance. Maeve sought no pledges. She desired no murmurs or solemn oaths. She simply observed him, silently, intently. And Eli experienced a peculiar realization. She was not awaiting a declaration of romance. She was waiting to ascertain if he would vanish now that he had been welcomed. He did not. He remained. By the ensuing week, They had fallen into a cadence that defied logical explanation on paper, yet fit as snugly as a well-worn glove. They toiled arduously. Their conversations were sparse. However, when they did speak, their words carried weight. "Why do you abstain from drink?" she inquired one day, as they worked in tandem on the barn roof. "When my brother succumbed to drink, I bled," he replied. She acknowledged this with a nod, driving the next nail with practiced efficiency. Another day, he posed the question, "How did your first husband meet his end?" She did not falter. He rode out in a drunken stupor, believing he could defy the blizzard. He could not. She tossed him a wrench and resumed her soaring. This was their unique form of affection, not conveyed through floral gestures, but through unvarnished honesty. One afternoon, while Maeve was in town bartering pelts for seeds, Eli ventured to the eastern pasture. There, affixed to a post, he discovered a note inscribed in crimson ink. "You have claimed what is not yours. I shall return to reclaim it. No name, no signature." Yet Eli recognized Jared's malevolent essence upon sight. He incinerated the note before Maeve's return. He remained silent. Not yet. That evening he simply sat on the porch, honing his axe until its blade gleamed like a polished mirror, quiet, focused, like a brewing storm. When Maeve arrived and observed him, she paused in the doorway. What occurred? Nothing. He lied. She perceived the deception, but did not press the issue. She poured 2 cups of tea and sat beside him as the sun dipped below the horizon. That night, she did not merely open her door to him. She reached for his hand in the darkness, and he allowed her to. A fortnight later, Maeve neglected her morning duties. This was unprecedented. Eli discovered her in bed, pale and feverish, her hand pressed to her abdomen. "What is amiss?" he asked, already reaching for her wrist, counting her pulse, touching her brow. She remained silent for a moment. Then, her voice barely a whisper carried by the wind, she stated, "I believe I am with child." The air seemed to be expelled from the room, as if struck by a powerful blow. Eli stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing. "You are not obliged to speak," she murmured. He remained silent. He simply knelt beside the bed, took her hand, and kissed her knuckles. A slow, steady, reassuring gesture. "I assured you I would not depart," he said, his voice thick with emotion. That was not her disposition. However, for the first time, her eyes softened with an intensity that was almost painful to behold. "I suppose we are indeed getting that daughter," he whispered. Within days, the town buzzed with speculation. That child cannot possibly be his. She married him for protection. Look at the predicament she finds herself in now. Besides, she is far too advanced in years for such a thing. Yet Maeve paid them no heed. She wore her pregnancy like protective armor, and Eli stood beside her as her unwavering bulwark. When Mrs. Talbot at the general store remarked about miraculous births emerging from the mud, Eli gently placed a sack of potatoes down, turned and stated, "Utter such a sentiment again, and you will witness me forget every lesson in civility I have ever received." The entire establishment fell into a profound silence. Even the floorboards seemed to cease their creaking. Maeve observed the entire exchange, and as they exited, she offered no word of thanks. Instead, she reached over, intertwined her little finger with his as they walked, and remarked, "You possess a remarkable aptitude for that." However, tranquility is a fleeting commodity on prairie land, particularly when a man like Jared Holt covets what rightfully belongs to you. He returned under the cloak of night, advancing rapidly with 3 cohorts in tow, armed, inebriated, and seething with animosity. They dispensed with pleasantries, igniting the edge of the eastern fence and awaiting the rising smoke to rouse them. Eli spotted it first, sprinting for water, bellowing for Maeve to remain indoors, but she disregarded his cries. She never heeded them. Grabbing a rifle, she stormed outside, a formidable embodiment of warfare herself. Her nightdress, drenched from the water pump, her gaze ignited. "I warned you," she declared into the swirling smoke. This territory is mine. Jared's laughter echoed from the darkness. Is that baby yours, Maeve, or does it belong to this fool? It matters not. In either case, neither of you will survive the winter. It was then that Eli emerged into the firelight, barefoot, bare-chested, his knuckles bleeding from where he'd smashed a window to reach the hose. I'm finished with this pretense of humility, he stated. Maeve tossed the rifle aside. He caught it with a single hand. What ensued was not a typical gunfight. It was a swift retribution. Eli did not fire first. He waited, his composure unnerving, his stillness formidable. When Jared's man raised his pistol, Eli shot the second man in the leg, then the shoulder. The third man fled before he could even draw his weapon. Jared stood alone, trembling. "Leave," Eli commanded. "If you bring fire here again, you won't be walking home next time." Jared opened his mouth as if to protest, but Maeve stepped to Eli's side, another rifle now in her hand, its barrel tilted just enough. Jared departed. He didn't ride, he walked back down the road. He had emerged from inside the house. Maeve stood in the kitchen, her hands trembling now that the immediate threat had passed. Eli draped the towel around her shoulders, poured her a glass of water, and murmured, "It's over." She looked at him, truly looked, her gaze piercing. "You could have killed him." "I would have," he replied, "if he had touched you." A beat of silence. Then Maeve whispered, "I'm afraid." "Of him?" Eli inquired. "No," she said, "of how much I love you." He offered no reply, simply leaning in to softly kiss her forehead, a gesture like a promise. As their foreheads touched, she whispered, "Marry me again." He smiled. "You already have." "Do it properly this time," she insisted. He nodded. "I'll even get a ring." They remarried that autumn. No officiant, no attendees, just the two of them, barefoot in the back pasture, standing within a circle of wild sunflowers Maeve had cultivated from her mother's cherished seeds. Eli slipped a simple silver ring onto her finger, a piece that had belonged to his mother. Maeve didn't weep, but her hand quivered as she placed her grandfather's band onto his. "With this ring," he vowed, "I promise to remain, to defend, to nurture whatever life brings our way, even if the world fails to comprehend it." She responded, "With this ring, I promise never to diminish myself so you might stand taller, and never to let you face adversity alone." They shared a kiss, a moment that conveyed more than any document, prayer, or public celebration ever could. The baby arrived prematurely, far too soon. The contractions began amidst a howling snowstorm, the winds shrieking, the ice coating the windows as if solidified glass. There was no immediate aid for miles. Maeve cried out once, biting down on a piece of cloth, not wanting Eli to witness her pain. But Eli remained unwavering. He meticulously boiled towels, fetched water, and sat behind her, allowing her to grip his hands until his bones felt the strain. At 3:14 in the morning, illuminated by lantern light and the rumble of thunder, their daughter entered the world, her face flushed red and her cry as fierce as the tempest outside. Maeve cradled her against her chest, sobbing into the infant's hair, whispering, "You've arrived." You came regardless. They named her June, in remembrance of the month Maeve's mother had passed, and the only month that had ever felt warm in Wyoming. Eli held their daughter as if she were a flame, a precious, fragile warmth. And there, amidst the heart of the storm, he declared, "I vow to teach her how to retaliate." Maeve looked up, utterly exhausted, her face streaked with blood, and replied, "And I will teach her never to apologize for her strength." The ranch underwent a transformation after June's arrival. The work itself remained arduous, unyielding, and unappreciated. However, the manner in which they navigated their daily lives shifted. They smiled more, touched more often. Maeve began singing as she cooked, her voice often off-key, but filled with palpable joy. Eli started writing in a notebook he kept concealed beneath the mattress, composing notes for June, a safeguard should life claim him prematurely. The external world continued to scrutinize and gossip, Yet within the sturdy walls of their stone dwelling, laughter was rekindled. And June, small and with eyes wide with a raw, untamed spirit, became the beacon that illuminated their existence. Then, one evening, 3 months later, a rider approached their gate. Maeve was gently rocking June by the hearth. Eli answered the door. It was a sheriff, hat in hand, his gaze lowered. "I felt you should hear this from me directly," he stated. "Jared Holtz is dead." Eli remained motionless. Maeve slowly rose from her chair, the fire behind her casting dancing shadows across her sharp features. "How?" she inquired. "Intoxicated, he drowned in his own well. Took a few of his men with him. One survived," the sheriff explained. "Jared had been planning another raid on your property." Eli closed the door behind the sheriff, his silence profound. The tempest that night was not from the sky. It raged within them. Maeve resumed her seat. June held close. Eli stood across the room, his hands clenched, his chest tight. "Do you believe it's truly over now?" Maeve whispered. Eli paused before answering. He walked over, kneeling beside her. He reached for June's tiny foot. "No," he said. "The kind of malice Jared harbored, it doesn't perish with him." He looked up at her. "It waits for an opportunity." Maeve swallowed hard, her voice suddenly softening. "Then we shall not provide one." The following spring, Maeve took June into town for the very first time. A hush fell over the streets as they entered. It wasn't surprise at Maeve becoming a mother. That rumor had already spread like wildfire. It was because the baby bore an uncanny resemblance to Eli. The same quiet intensity in her stare, the same eyes that held a deep, knowing wisdom. As they entered the general store, Mrs. Talbot's expression was one of palpable animosity. Maeve met her gaze unflinchingly. She handed the baby to Eli, leaned over the counter and stated, "Say just one word." Mrs. Talbot remained silent. As they departed, Eli looked at Maeve and remarked, "I hope June grows up to be exactly like you." Maeve gave him a sidelong glance, her stature imposing, formidable. "No," he corrected, his conviction unshaken. One night, as summer began to settle in, Eli found himself unable to sleep. He stepped outside, sitting on the porch with June resting against his chest. She was teething, evidently displeased. Maeve joined him, bringing a blanket, wrapping it around all three of them. They sat in comfortable silence, fireflies blinking across the open field, the moon observing them like a familiar companion. Eli whispered, "Do you think she'll be all right in this world?" Maeve kissed June's forehead. "She'll be more than all right," she assured him. "She'll be far too much for it." He smiled. "I certainly hope so." The next morning, they awoke to discover a letter nailed to their fence. No name, just a single sentence. "You took what he left behind." Maeve read the message twice before burning it in the sink. She remained silent for 2 days. Eli understood better than to inquire. He had witnessed that silence before, the kind of quiet that precedes a significant disruption. He reinforced the perimeter, sharpened their tools, and loaded every firearm. By the third night, Maeve finally spoke. "I thought it was finished," she whispered, believing that Jared's demise had concluded their struggle. Eli leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed. "You cannot erase men of that nature in a single generation," he stated. "You must outlive them. You must out-teach them. You must outlove them." Maeve gazed at June, asleep in her arms. "She is the reason they will return." "No," Eli countered. "She is the reason we stand firm." They did not have to wait long. 5 nights later, an attempt was made to set fire to the south fence. Eli spotted the glow from his upstairs window. He grabbed his coat, shotgun, and boots, rushing outside. Maeve met him halfway, a rifle slung over her shoulder. No words were exchanged. They moved with practiced precision, a well-oiled machine. However, this time, the fire was merely a diversion. A figure crept towards the back door, armed with a blade. Another advanced towards the barn. These men were not inebriated like Jared's associates. They were calculated, paid, and silent. Eli saw the glint of metal just before it reached the door. He fired once. The man dropped. Maeve remained unmoved. Another man lunged from the shadows. She spun, delivering a clean shot to his leg. He cried out, collapsing into the dirt, pleading for mercy. Eli strode over, fury simmering beneath his skin. "Who sent you?" he demanded. "Jared's brother," the man gasped. "He wants the girl. Says she's not right." The man continued. "So the land needs a name that holds meaning once more." Maeve cocked her rifle. "Tell him," she instructed, "we've already given her one." And with a calm, unnerving steadiness that seemed to freeze the night air, she fired into the dirt beside his head. He fled, limping, panicked and bleeding. Eli approached and extinguished the remaining flames with his coat. Maeve leaned against the fence, her breathing heavy. "I'm exhausted," she whispered. "I know," he replied. She looked at him then, no longer projecting an image of unyielding strength or invincibility, but simply as a woman who had endured immense hardship and still chose love. "Do you think we can raise her without burdening her with all of this?" she asked. Eli nodded slowly. "We won't raise her to carry it," he assured her. "We'll raise her to shatter it." The following week, they installed a gate with a name meticulously carved into the arch, Callahan Ridge, and beneath it, in smaller script, "Home of June, born of fire, raised by the storm." 10 years elapsed. June grew taller than most boys her age. She rode horses before breakfast, her shooting accuracy surpassing that of the sheriff. She read books well beyond her grade level and constructed fences without complaint. The town continued to whisper, "She's too rough. She never smiles. She doesn't wear dresses." But June paid them no mind, for at home her mother told her she was forged like iron, and her father read her poetry by the fire when her hands were blistered. Every night Maeve tucked her in with a single declaration, "The world is afraid of girls who don't flinch," and every night June whispered back, "Then I shall never flinch." One autumn afternoon, June asked Eli, "Why did Mama choose you?" Eli smiled. "Because I needed her," he replied, "and she needed someone who wouldn't retreat when things became difficult." June tilted her head. "And did you ever run?" "Only toward her," he answered. Maeve passed away on a spring morning. She was in the same chair where she had first held June. There was no warning, no sound, just the gentle sunlight filtering through the window and the sweet fragrance of lilacs drifting from outside. Eli found her with a book resting on her lap and a faint smile gracing her lips. He did not weep immediately. He simply sat beside her, took her hand, and whispered, "I am still here." He laid her to rest beneath the sunflowers where she had once married him. He carved the stone himself, Maeve Callahan, the storm they could not break, wife, mother, builder of giants. On the day June turned 18, she rode alone to the far edge of their property. She found Eli on the porch, his features softened by age, his eyes still scanning the horizon as if anticipating trouble's return. She dismounted her steed, drawing in a full, fortifying breath. "I depart on the morrow," she declared. "My purpose is to gain knowledge, impart wisdom, and to engage in conflict more effectively." Eli gave a slow, understanding nod. "Your mother would be filled with pride." "I shall return," she promised. "You certainly had best," he responded. Her gaze then met his, those familiar, profound eyes conveying a deep understanding. "I love you, Father," she murmured. He rose gradually, drawing her into a strong embrace, holding her close. "I never required a formidable daughter," he confessed softly, "but by heavens, I am grateful I have one." As she departed the following morning, Eli remained by the carved entryway, his hand resting on the weathered wood, observing the plume of dust trailing her conveyance as it dissolved into the bright expanse. And carried upon the breeze, he could still discern Maeve's gentle admonition, "Raise her to stand unyielding," to which he softly replied, Indeed, we have. Should this narrative have stirred your sentiments in the slightest, if Maeve's resilience or Eli's unspoken affection brought to mind someone you have known, or if June inspired belief in an unconventional form of heritage, then kindly refrain from simply moving on. Subscribe to this channel and activate the notification bell to ensure you never miss another tale that resonates so deeply within the soul. We have an array of compelling narratives forthcoming, stories that mend, stories that provoke, stories that linger long after their conclusion. We appreciate your viewership. We anticipate your presence in our subsequent transmission.